was hired by the town of Bristol in 1994 at a time when there was a perceived annexation threat from the city of Kenosha across the interstate highway system. And just to kind of refresh our recollection, the town of Bristol was a basically rural town which bordered on no incorporated municipalities, that is to say no village and no city, up until the time that the town of Pleasant Prairie, went to the state legislature and got special permission to become a village. They did not do it the statutory way. They went to the legislature and got some special rules to become a village. Part of that, they worked out an arrangement with Kenosha so that Kenosha, which was otherwise surrounded by the town, came right out to the interstate highway. So virtually overnight, the town of Bristol, which previously had been pretty much left alone with a barrier of the interstate highway, instead was cheek to jowl with two fairly interested municipalities with annexation powers. And beginning in the early 1990s, these two municipalities, in particular Pleasant Prairie, fairly vigorously pursued annexations into the town of Bristol. And that's when I got called in. We were playing defense. We were in the courts fighting these intrusions into the town. City of Kenosha wasn't quite as vigorous, but they were clearly interested in moving and expanding their territory to the west. So the town of Bristol had its hands full at that time dealing with both of these, both the village of Pleasant Prairie and the city of Kenosha, and trying to make sure that we could stop what was going on and regroup in order to take care of what the new reality was. And part of that reality was that we had some fairly aggressive development potential right across the interstate, and now over on this side of the interstate. Over a period of about 3 years, we ended up negotiating some fairly comprehensive agreements with both of these municipalities. And they ended up in what I'll just call a regular contract under the stuff. I'm not going to bore you with too much technical stuff, although if you want technical stuff, I can do that too. But it's basically a contract that was entered into between the town of Bristol and the city of Kenosha on the one hand and Pleasant Prairie on the other hand. They were both similar types of contracts, and I'll get to some of the differences, but they were similar in a couple of respects. One of which is they created permanent boundaries between the municipalities. So there became, north of 50 and east of MB, a city growth area. And the town of Bristol agreed that it would not contest any annexations that occurred within that growth area. And the flip side of that is Kenosha agreed that it would not annex outside of that growth area. And so there was set aside an area of growth, but also permanence. Similarly, with Pleasant Prairie, there was a growth area that was defined as being it was not quite as easy to define by county roads, but it was east of County Trunk Highway U, and tried to follow some property owners' lines going forward. And similarly, there would be a growth area for the village of Pleasant Prairie there, and a no annexation, and a no further annexation boundary, a permanent boundary with the village of Pleasant Prairie. There are a couple other bells and whistles, generally speaking, within these agreements. One of which is that the town of Bristol would have limited ability to grow on sewer and water. In other words, we bought or reserved sewer capacity both for the treatment of sewage as well as the conveyancing of it. And those are two separate issues, because you can treat it, but if you can't get it there, it doesn't make any difference. And if you can get it there, but you can't treat it, that doesn't make any difference. So we were able to reserve both capacity and treatment in both areas, so that in certain limited areas, the town of Bristol could develop in a balanced way going forward. A few other things that were in there, one of which is critical, was that there was an agreement by both the city and the village that they would not contest any incorporation of the town of Bristol into a village, so long as that incorporation occurred west, in the west, what we said was the western half of the township. So, you know, wherever that line was, if we were west of there, filed a petition for incorporation, then they wouldn't contest it. That the incorporation would also have to be not special legislation like Pleasant Prairie did. In other words, we'd have to do it what I'll call it the old-fashioned way, by going into the statutes and showing that this was a area that actually functioned as a municipality. And you know, this is what is surrounding us now in land planning terms is technically, when it was in a town, it was called a hamlet, because it was a concentration of population with a lot of institutions such as churches and schools that would indicate civic life above and beyond what an agrarian situation would be. Then those two agreements pretty much had both of those, or had all those elements to it, and each of them called to then go to the next step, which was to create what's called a cooperative plan. So we started with a contract, and then we go to a cooperative plan. And the difference between the two is that a cooperative plan is more complicated, and it is approved by the state of Wisconsin, and it can't be changed without the approval of the state of Wisconsin. It really is a higher degree of permanence. We negotiated along those lines, and we were able to come to an agreement with the city of Kenosha. And in 2000, by the way, these other agreements were signed in 1997. And in 2000, we were able to reach a cooperative plan with the city of Kenosha. And these basic terms were then carried in a more permanent fashion through the cooperative plan. We were unable to reach agreement with Pleasant Prairie, and I'm not Pleasant Prairie, so I'm not going to try to speak for them, but we tried, we were unsuccessful in getting them to agree to the cooperative plan. Things drifted along for a while, and then we picked up the cooperative plan idea again, and the then town of Bristol proposed a cooperative plan to the village of Pleasant Prairie, which then rejected it in early 2008. And therein kind of picks up the story at that point. At that point, the town of Bristol decided that it would exercise its contractual rights to seek incorporation in the western part of the township. And for those who follow these things, it's very interesting, fascinating stuff. We defined the whole western part of the township as being the new village of Bristol, and the state of Wisconsin rejected that, saying it was too large. And so we worked with the state and agreed upon a territory with sufficient population, sufficient indicators of urban life that they agreed could be a village. And so they said, okay, that's good. Now you go to the voters. And so the voters in late last year approved the creation of the village of Bristol. And that was the certificate of incorporation was issued by the state of Wisconsin on December 1st of 2009. One of the